Hello, good evening. Good evening. Here we are back again for another Molten No-NAMM, Molten Live, Molten Modular to Technology live stream. This evening, you're very, very welcome to join us. We're here live on YouTube, on Twitch, and on Facebook in various places, wherever you can find us. Really, if you'd like to join us, you're very, very welcome. Chat and conversation is always appreciated in the chat. And if there's any questions or anything you have this evening you want to put forward, then do drop it in there and we'll do our best to look at it. Potentially ignore it is more likely. This evening we're talking less about technology and more about the actual fruits of our labor, which is a little bit scary, a little bit different for me. I'm quite happy talking about synthesizers all day long, but when it comes to actually talking about the product, the music, the creativity that oozes out of us, that's a slightly different matter. But I have someone on hand here who's going to help navigate our way through the murky fields of electronic sound. And that is Push, the editor of Electronic Sound, who has joined us this evening for a chat about all things music. So let me bring our man in and we will begin. Hey, how you doing?
Hello, Robin. I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Quite excited about this one. As I say, I'm really out of my comfort zone because although I love making music, always have, I've never really listened to the right stuff, and I always feel out of my depth when chatting to other synthy people, other electronic musos about the actual music, because they're always talking about stuff I've never heard of. Because I just seem to have I've seemed to have been to different places, and I can't always always catch up. But before we get into my story, which of course is what all of these streams is always about, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you fit into all of this?
Well, you described me as a long-time music journalist, which I thought was a very kind way of saying a quite old music journalist. So I've been writing about music since it's about 40 years basically.
Yeah.
Started off with a fanzine in the kind of post-punk days. I was 15 when punk happened, so that was it for me. That was my life changed forever at that point, really. And then I wrote for various magazines in the early 80s, and then started at Melody Maker in 1985.
Right.
And I was there for 10 years. So that was my the first big thing that I kind of did, I guess. So I was,
that was
Melody
85 to 95. So I mean,
85 to 95.
dare I ask you what your highlights were of that time? Because that was my mid-teens to mid-20s. That was the time I was on the button.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it was a pretty good time to be. To be honest, any time is a good time to be a music journalist, really. But that point in time, Melody Maker was in a really great position. We were in the early 80s. The NME was the big was the main week of the 3 weekly magazines: Sounds, Melody Maker, and NME. NME was very much in the ascendancy after punk. Sounds was the best magazine, was the best of the papers for punk, I think. And then when it got into the beginning of the 80s, NME really became the magazine. It had people like Paul Morley writing for it, and it was very pretentious, but everybody sort of liked it and loved it. But then when you got into the mid-80s, and Melody Maker was always the kind of magazine, the paper that was still writing about jazz music. It hadn't got its head round, it barely got its head round punk, and then it barely got its head round what happened after punk. But by the sort of mid-80s, 85, when I started there, the editor was Alan Jones, and he started bringing in lots of new people, and it became, I think, in the late 80s, really probably the dominant magazine of the 3 weeklies, although Sounds went down and disappeared in, I think, about 88. So it was certainly a good time to be at Melody Maker at that point in time, and, I was very lucky and got the chance to interview lots of interesting people, go to interesting places. Good time was had, certainly.
Excellent. So yeah, could continue then. Sorry, I interrupted your stream.
That's right. Well, I mean, when I was at Moneymaker, I wrote about electronic music because my main interest, I suppose, kind of coming out of punk was post-punk and reggae, actually. I was a big reggae fan, still am. And when I was at Melody Maker, I actually was quite early on, started writing a lot about hip hop as well.
Mm.
So I wrote a lot of hip hop stuff, and I wrote a lot of kind of rock stuff as well. So I interviewed people like Guns N' Roses and Nirvana and Primal Scream, people like that. I mean, it was predominantly a rock music paper,
Yeah.
but and also the hip hop stuff. So people like NWA and De La Soul and people like that. But then with Acid House happening in '88, that kind of opened things up a little bit more. And I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And I went to all the early Acid House clubs. I'd kind of been into a little bit of electronic music in the early '80s. I guess people like, I hesitate to say actually, Human League, I kind of thought, yeah, I quite liked them. I quite liked Gary Newman. I was never really into any of that stuff, though, particularly. The odd thing like Daniel Miller, The Normal, that was a fantastic record. And Cabaret Voltaire, I really loved them as well. They were a bit
Mm.
more edgier somehow. They were less pop, more kind
Yeah.
of grit, more punk, I guess, really. But with Acid House and with house music, starting from about '86 when I first started getting into house music, there was nobody else really writing about that at Melody Maker, maybe one or two others. And I was very lucky enough to be able to start writing about acid house, the acid house music, really. And then in my latter time at Melody Maker, that's what I was largely writing about. So people like KLF, Orbital, people like that, Chemical Brothers a little bit later on, Underworld, Aphex Twin. Got to interview Aphex Twin 3 times, which was fantastic, particularly since he doesn't speak to anybody now, and hasn't done for years. And then towards the end of my time at Melody Maker, I started working on a prototype for a magazine which became Music, Muzik, which some people may remember.
Yeah.
It was a dance music magazine, basically, and I was the first editor of that magazine for 3 or 4 years. Then a magazine called Mondo, I was the editor of there for a bit. Then I kind of got out of magazines and did books, and then came back into it with Electronic Sound, which started in 2013. So we've been going 9 years now.
Mm.
And
But you started off online, is that right?
Yeah, we started off. Electronic Sound was initially an app. It was a magazine app.
Right.
It was kind of weird because as I'd been out of magazines for a while. I'd been sort of working on books and stuff, and I moved out of London. I moved down to Somerset, and I kind of was there a couple of years, and I suddenly thought I've sort of retired by mistake. It's a bit like Whitnell and I going on holiday by mistake. I didn't mean to stop working, but I kind of did. So I sort of had an idea at one point for a magazine about electronic music that would cover the entire range of electronic music, and that would be, the original idea, I think, was predominantly a heritage magazine. So a lot of retro stuff, a lot of stuff of '80s stuff and '70s and old stuff, basically. So I did a one-off version of it with Future Publishing that was just called Electronic. It had Underworld on the cover. It came out in 2012, and it kind of did all right, but they weren't interested in developing it further. So as the months went on, working with Mark Rowland, who I'd worked with on this one-off magazine for Future, we started thinking, well, can we do something ourselves? We didn't really want to do a website, but at that point in time, Apple had launched Newsstand, which I don't know if you remember that at all. It was an app for magazines, basically, and within Newsstand, you could get newspapers and magazines.
That's right.
So there were, all the kind of, particularly American magazines were in there, obviously. It was Steve Jobs' kind of like idea. He came up with this idea. So when we launched Electronic Sound in 2013, we were in Newsstand as one of the apps. We were one of many, many hundreds of magazines within Newsstand. There weren't too many British titles. I don't know that there were many music magazines at all in there. But but it was kind of cool because it was, very whizzy. These weren't regular magazines. They weren't PDFs. We had to build them,
Mm.
which was for me, I am not the least bit technical, was a real challenge and quite interesting. After a little while, it became hell, actually, to be honest with you. The Apple review process is it was like a black hole that you
Yeah.
disappeared into a couple of
Yeah.
weeks.
Am I right
Um,
in thinking it was like, I'm just trying to remember the app. It
yeah,
was like a wooden shelf, and you would have these covers sitting on it. There'd be like a National Geographic was probably the free one you could get,
yeah,
and it was like, as you say, it's a glossy magazine rack. It was, yeah,
that's
quite nice.
exactly it.
Yeah.
It was great. It was really great. And, we built this thing that, I say thing because I really wasn't ever sure what it was. The content was as a magazine, but we had kind of panels that you could sweep up and down and buttons that you could press and photos would pop up and video and audio in there. So it was
It's
it
like a
was great.
CD-ROM multimedia experience. That's what it
Yeah, I,
was.
I guess that's what it was. Yeah, I guess that's what it was. But it was really bloody difficult to do. um, and I, we kind of got a designer who kind of had to learn from scratch how to do this thing. As I say, Mark Rowland was involved, Neil Mason, who's electronic sound, been with electronic sound right way through, both of them. And yeah, we would do an issue. We tried to do an issue. The original idea was to do one every other month, I think, if I remember rightly, and then quite quickly it slipped to every 3 months because it was just so difficult to put together.
Mm.
Once we'd got the hang of it, which took probably about 5 or 6 issues before we kind of got the hang of it properly and could do it a little bit more easily, two things happened. First of all, Apple dumped Newsstand. So all of those magazines that had been in Newsstand and could be found easily from, if you wanted a magazine, that's where you went, or a newspaper, that's where you went. And suddenly all of the apps that had been in Newsstand were just dumped out into the App Store,
Right.
along with weather apps and games and everything else, and nobody could find you at that point. It was just hopeless. So that was one thing that happened. The second thing that happened was that more and more formats were becoming available. Each time Apple updated the operating system or brought out a new phone, everyone went, "Oh, great, a new iPhone," and we just went, "Oh God, no," because we had to redesign everything and refit it to a different screen size. And by the time we stopped, which was we did 20 issues, no, 19 issues on the app, as an app. By the time we stopped, we were doing seven different versions of the magazine. We were monthly by that point, and we spent maybe 2 weeks putting together the content and 2 weeks just trying to figure out how the hell to make it work on Android, on Apple, on different systems, on different screen sizes. It was just awful, really, if I'm honest. To the point where we just suddenly thought, and we were doing okay. We were selling, I don't know, maybe 1,000 copies, maybe something like that. We were losing money. There's no question about that. We were losing our souls, I think, as well, to be honest. But we had an investor in the mag, a couple of investors in the mag, and they stuck with us through this kind of whole period. And then we kind of said, we went to our investors and said, "You know what? We think we want to do a print magazine. Let's just try one and see how it goes." We all came from print, so we know how to do a print magazine. You do one of them, you don't do 7 of them. So we did a print magazine in, I think it was 2016, and issue 20, which we called issue 2.0. Which we thought was quite funny, being 2.0, and we were doing a print magazine as 2.0.
Oh yeah, that's very clever. I don't think
Yeah.
they didn't get past us.
And we kind of did it to see what would happen, really, what the reaction would be, and we sent it out to loads of people within the industry, and I think we sent out a few hundred copies. We printed 2,500. And we spent a lot of money because printing a magazine is a lot more expensive than putting anything on the internet. So we sent out a few hundred copies, and we put it for sale on our website, which was sort of, didn't have a huge number of hits really. And we were astonished because it just flew. It just sold really quickly. I think we originally planned to maybe try and sell a couple of hundred, and we sold out of everything within probably 10 days or so, something like that.
Mm.
So that made us think, oh, okay, maybe we should do this then. So that's what we did. That was the start of Electronic Sound, the print magazine. We did the first print issue 2 months later that went into the shops. And at that point, we were selling, we were printing several thousand at that point now. And yeah.
And what was the year on that?
What was the year?
Yeah. So when did
I
you
think
start in print?
I think it was 2016.
2016.
It might have been end of 2015 potentially. No, 2016, I think.
Yeah.
2016, yeah. That changed everything for us. So, 6 years on, and we're now up to issue 85 of the magazine. So we've done all right, actually. In fact, we've done pretty well. And one of the things that we do, if people don't know the magazine, is a lot of magazines have a free CD with them, or that's what it generally is, a CD that's slapped on the cover. We did that for the first 3 or 4 issues that went into the shops, and they did okay. We sold a few thousand. Getting into Smiths is its own kind of nightmare in some ways, but we got in there, and we were doing okay, but it was kind of, I don't know, it wasn't really kind of selling the way that we wanted it to sell in terms of volume, but also the kind of reaction from people. We were a bit like all the other magazines, really. So we decided to take the CD off the magazine, see what happened, and it didn't do any worse than it did with a CD. So that was one thing we thought was interesting. And then a couple of issues further down the line, Mark Rowland, who's the deputy editor of the mag, came up with the idea of we'd put out a 7-inch single. We put out a couple of 7-inch singles, standalone singles, and we had a whole bunch of left of a Wolfgang Fleur single that we'd put out, and we did a Kraftwerk cover. We didn't interview Kraftwerk because, again, a bit like Aphex Twin, Ralph doesn't really talk to too many people.
Was it this one? Was this a later one?
Well, it wasn't that one, actually. It was an earlier one than that. That's
yeah.
issue 40. It was issue 27. And we sold the magazine bundled up with the 7-inch single. And we had about 400 or 500 7-inches left, and we bung £5 on the price, and we sold everything in about a day. They all went in a day.
That's really
so it was a weird thing about the magazine on its own, sort of sold okay. The singles on their own sort of sold okay, but when we put the two together, they really went. So that's what we do now. Every issue, we bundle it up with a 7-inch single. Occasionally we do a CD, but it's generally a 7-inch single that is linked to the cover, whoever's on the cover.
Yeah.
And you can subscribe to it and buy it as a bundle, the two together, or you can buy just the magazine on its own. You can't buy the record without the magazine, though. That's the thing that that's the deal we have with the labels and with the artists.
There's something sort of ridiculously luxurious about that, about having the 7-inch single in there as well. Yeah. You imagine it probably inflates the price, but that is, for me at least, not any reason to think about it. There's something sort of uncommonly beautiful. Well, there is. We know that it's an established fact that vinyl is extraordinary. We don't know what it is. There's something about, there's a mysterious, some kind of energy field that wraps itself around it, which we just find really nice. And so when you receive the magazine and a piece of vinyl, it's just a lovely thing. I mean, the magazine itself, if people out there are not familiar with it, I've got a few here that I'll flash around. but the quality of the paper stock, the feel of the
Yeah.
front, and then to have a piece of vinyl inside as well, which is always beautifully designed. I mean, the covers are, are beautifully designed as well, covering all sorts of things. It's just a lovely opening or grabbing of a magazine, oops, that way, experience, which I think has been
We,
lacking, you know.
yeah, I think so. And we try to do different things with the cover. Like that one you just put up, the orb.
Yeah.
The idea of putting a picture of the orb on the cover. No, we put a picture of a dog on instead. It's Alex's dog, so he loved that, and
Yeah.
we thought it was quite a fun thing to do.
But they're
Yeah,
great.
we
I
often
mean,
do.
unrecognizable from month to month. They're completely, although I mean, the banner remains similar, but the front is
Yeah,
just an explosion of color. It's a bit more like, I don't know, Cosmopolitan. It's more of a lifestyle magazine, I suppose, is the vibe that you get off it. But you know that it's about electronic music, so you feel sophisticated purchasing it, um, uh, while at the same time knowing that it's going to be about a subject that you like. It's really interesting. I mean, there's something weird about the timing of all this, in that the timing that you put it together, it somehow
mm,
ties in with this explosion in interest in synthesizers. I mean, it's funny when you were talking about the sort of the 80s to 90s and the arrival of acid house and dance music. It's it's almost as if I was thinking that all of the people who got into dance music in the early 90s are now where we are now. They're now older people, later on in life. Perhaps the families have already been had. We have a little bit of disposable income. We start then looking back nostalgically at those times when we danced all night and had a wonderful time, and are now in a position where we can recreate that kind of at home, build our own tracks about it, and read nostalgic stuff in electronic sound, as well as discovering the new music that's going on as well. So it's all of that has come together very recently. We've had a void, I think, from from 2000 through to 2015 maybe, where not a whole lot went on for us lot. I think we're all having kids, or we're all working hard at our jobs, or whatever it was that distracted us from our love of music, or love of electronics, or a love of making music. And it's come about that we're now able to do that again. And I think that's but obviously I'm talking about a very narrow band of people around a similar age to me, but that's just kind of my perception of it. And I think we're a large bunch of people with a lot of buying power, and that's perhaps is what's driving our little renaissance that we're having at the minute.
yeah, I think I agree with that, and I think it's as well as each generation, because I think if you think about it's really, for me, it's punk. It's everything that came after punk, really. So you've
Mm,
got that the electronic music of the early '80s. Prior to that, you've got people like Kraftwerk, you've got Krautrock, you've got Noi and bands like that, Tangerine Dream. Go back further than that, and you've got Radiophonic Workshop and Daphne
mm.
Oram and Pierre Henry, and you go real back to the experimentalists, Stockhausen, etc. But I think it was the kind of like, it was after punk, and the way that the independent record business started to happen and started to thrive. Labels like Mute Records, obviously Mute were a huge label in the early '80s, and 40 odd years on, they still are a huge label, still doing great stuff. Um, so you've got that kind of early '80s through synth pop, through Human
Mm.
League, Depeche Mode, all of those kind of bands. You get into the kind of mid '80s, and I think just at that point at which some of those bands they're either stopping or they're not as interesting. You've then
We
got
sort of
house
had the Hit
music.
Factory come in, didn't we? I mean, I've given this a lot of thought
Yeah,
as well, in that, going back to, say, the early 80s, there was just this extraordinary amount of creativity in little bands and synthesizers, and a mixture of stuff. When you listen to those first couple of Now That's What I Call Music albums, they're just full of these classic pop synth tracks of just fabulousness. You go a little bit later, and it really, I mean, obviously it's all a matter of taste, but it seems to just go downhill so rapidly in how homogenized it gets, how similar it all gets.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then it's not really, I mean, for my experience being very much into pop, being very trendy, I suppose, in my teens, as opposed to being some kind of alternative person that I maybe turned into later on. But I was very much into pop music. But it just went bad, and there had to come a point in my late teens where I had to make a decision: am I just going to go off and do a normal job, or am I going to get into a different scene? And so, from my point of view, I ended up in rock music and in folk music, as opposed to my friends who went
Right.
into acid house and dance music. So I went a different way, and have come back to it later. But it went really bad at the end, the end of the 80s. And it's like, what is going on? And I almost remember, watching some music show in the early 90s, I think. And it was, oh God, it's gone out of my head. It's the, Motorcycle Emptiness was on with, the band is, oh, see now, I can't remember. Well, it was a combination of this band who I can no longer remember, and Suede and people like that. There was just this
Right.
glimmer just before Britpop happened.
Right.
And I remember seeing Skunk and Antsy actually on Clapham Common. And there was
Right.
just this vibe happening of like music coming back and guitars coming back and bands and aggro and, attitude and stuff that seemed to have been lost on Jason Donovan and Kylie Minogue
Yeah.
and all those lovely people.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it was a fascinating time. And then I don't know what we're talking about anymore, but it's just interesting how that journey happens. Manic Street Preachers, thank you, Gert. Thank you. God, I'm losing my mind. I mean, having a guy in a balaclava on the telly after you've been subjected to so much spin me round, round, baby, round, round, and then we get the Manic Street Preachers. It's just like, thank goodness for that. There's something
Yeah.
out there.
The thing is, though, that there are so many different paths that people take to
Yeah,
wherever they're going through music, and it will always be so. Thankfully, it's brilliant.
yeah,
So like Manic's kind of passed me by because I was kind of probably, so what we're talking, 90,
yeah.
91, something like that. The whole Britpop thing passed me by completely. Well, actually, it didn't, because it was on the front cover of bloody Melody Maker every week. And I hated it, to be
Yeah,
honest with you.
sure,
I didn't
yeah.
like any of those bands, Blur and all those kind of bands. I found it a few days ago. Actually, I had a letter from David Alban. He wrote me a letter asking me to come and see his band, who were called Seymour at the time, which
Oh,
was Blur. They became Blur later on. And I went to see them, and I I didn't like them at all, and I said so. So, but
but he's
at that time,
matured, hasn't he? I mean, his musical taste has matured
oh
massively
yeah,
over the
totally.
years.
Well, there
So
you go. That's another path that he's
yeah,
gone on.
he's fascinating
So,
these days.
but there's always an alternative to
Mm.
whatever is pop. There's always an alternative. So it's kind of it's wherever you look, if you look hard enough, you'll find something else that is really interesting going on. And there's always an antidote to the sugar.
Mm.
I always veer towards the dark and the grit and the nastiness, really, I guess, in music. Um, I don't know what that says about me. I dread to think, but yeah, but where you get to eventually with through the 80s and into the 90s, then, and you got bands like Orbital and then Underworld and
Yeah.
Chemical Brothers, and then it becomes something else. And I think as you go through I think there was another dip in the late 90s, early 2000s for electronic music. And when we started with electronic sound in 2013, there was this, as you said, this change happening at the time. And
Mm.
I don't think when we started, the original idea, as I said, was like a heritage magazine. So the first cover I think was Carl Bartos. The next one was Gary Newman. And we were kind of doing stuff like, we were very 80s kind of stuff. But we quickly realized that actually what was really interesting was all the little bands that were coming through,
Yeah.
who some of them were actually not that young, but they were doing interesting things. But there were a lot of young bands and young artists, bedroom producers, that were suddenly out there. And I kind of think what happened around that time was a bit similar to what happened maybe in the early 80s, when people were able to get hold of synthesizers for the first time and make music with them, as opposed to, watching Art of Noise or whatever with their Fairlights and their unaffordable bits of gear. So yeah, and I think we're in a real renaissance for electronic music now. There's no
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's
But
fascinating
it's down to the gear. It's not just the people make it. It's the people. It's the gear they've got. It's the
yes.
things that they can use to make that music. That is, and it's the two together. I
Mm.
think that are the key.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this all goes hand in hand with software and hardware as well. In that, uh, at the end, well, in mid 90s, perhaps when we had the drop, is because things were turning to software. Everyone was emptying their studios and selling their stuff on, or trashing it and moving to computers, and that opened a lot of doors for a lot of people in terms of being a bedroom producer. But it also, um, I don't know, it's you can't smash a computer against the wall in the same way you can a guitar or a synthesizer. You can't draw pen all over it and mod it and plug things into it and rewire it like you can bits of hardware. There's something visceral that's lost. There's something in the connection to it. While I can exert an enormous amount of kind of creativity through this tiny spot on my mouse, it's nowhere near the same as grabbing hold of some knobs, man, and moving them about. That is a very different experience. And I think
Yeah,
from say the late 90s into say 2010, the software was king, and everyone was running that and finding themselves using the same MIDI packs and using the same sample CDs and using the same virtual instruments. And that um, we found ourselves in preset land, and that made us duller and less interesting, I think.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think away from the studios and away from the bedrooms as well, what you had in the mid 90s was the rise of the super club. So you had places
Yes.
like Cream and Ministry of Sound, where the music that they were playing was generally pretty mainstream, not very challenging and exciting, and you know it was it was a very different experience to a dark and dingy acid house club had been 5 years earlier. Um, and I think that everything became homogenized as well, and I think that kind of in a way, I mean, I left music in 1998, um, and by that point, I think I kind of felt too old for it. At that point,
Mm,
I wasn't really actually on in retrospect thinking about it now. I really wasn't, and I probably could have hung in there for another 3 or 4 years probably, but I felt that it had gone somewhere where I wasn't comfortable with, because it was just too safe and bland and big, and it wasn't so exciting. There were exciting things happening, but it wasn't the prevailing scene.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think once things get like that, I mean, that's one of the things we do with that. We say about electronic sound, we are not a dance music magazine. We don't write about clubs. We don't write about DJs. That's not what we do at all. And I think making that distinction, it was quite important for us, because people didn't understand. Even now we still get PRs who will pitch us something from that is totally inappropriate, because thanks to EDM, a lot of it gets called electronic music now. Where I
Sure,
don't
yeah.
kind of, for me, it's not really electronic music. It's house music, or a
Mm.
version of, or it's EDM or something like that. That sounds pretty snobby, but actually, I think I don't mind being snobby about that, actually, because I know what I like, and I
Yeah,
don't like that.
yeah. And you have to be able to differentiate it. It's human to do so, because it makes things easier if we can filter stuff, have some kind of way of categorizing something. It saves us an awful lot of time in in running around in the wrong places when you're actually looking for something else.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
my journey with electronic sound, if you like, is that because I found myself, I mean, I came from software into hardware. I had that experience. I was writing about computers and working on computers and building computers for studios and that kind of thing. And then I found myself writing about synthesizers for Gear News, because I know about synthesizers, used to have synthesizers in the past, and just found myself in a position where I was writing about them. And so I was learning very quickly as I went, and refining an enjoyment of stuff, digging out my old Vangelis albums, all that kind of stuff. And what I found, and this is like, I think 2016 probably, was that I have no clue what is being made these days on synthesizers, other than your pop music. You know, my kids have got plenty of pops party CDs that have got lots of lovely modern tunes on, and there's tons of synths and all of that. But I had no clue as to what could be out there, what the scene was, what the result was of all these synthesizers that are coming along and all these people that are using them. And so I all of my listening at that time was nostalgic. I was picking up old albums of old stuff I used to like, or I'd have Spotify playing 80s stuff or 90s stuff. And you're constant on this cycle of listening to the same music because it's comforting and it makes you feel nice. And, you know, there's something safe in the familiar, of course. But I thought, right, okay, as I'm learning about this stuff, I really should know more about the current scene. And so around that time, Electronic Sound yourselves put out this idea that you could invest in this new magazine that's going into print, and you're looking for investors. And I think I wrote it up for Gear News or something like that. And I thought, well, maybe this is a really interesting way in. So I think I bought a copy, something I can't quite remember, but just as I say, the quality of the feel of the magazine and the experience, having not bought a magazine for years and years and years, because why on earth would you? I mean, magazine's dead, print is dead, for heaven's sake. And it was just such a, you know, a lovely experience, a lovely glossy magazine with stuff in it. And there was things in there from the past, things in from the future. You know, there was technology in there. You had synthesizer Dave taking apart a synthesizer and rebuilding it. You had some knob at the back talking nonsense about some crap or other. Fat Roland, that's the fella. And yeah, it was just this weird mix of stuff. But through that, I discovered things like Hannah Peel, and I discovered lots of other things I can no longer remember, as well as learning more stuff about the Radiophonic Workshop. I mean, I applied to be in the Radiophonic Workshop when I was a kid. That was my dream job. That's all I wanted to do.
Fantastic.
And I didn't get in, of course, but then there we go. But I did do electronics for the music industry back in, well, I applied to do electronics for the music industry back in 1988, which is ridiculous. Right. But unfortunately, I failed my A-level, so I had to do it. I did it then later in what was after that, 90-something, 92, 93. Anyway, by the by, so I saw Electronic Sound magazine as kind of a way of educating myself about the current music scene. And it has absolutely been that. It's been fascinating learning about old artists or existing artists who still play stuff, whether that's Tangerine Dream, whether that's who else have I got in here? Kraftwerk, post-punk bits and pieces. There's stuff about synthesizers, interviews with Trevor Horn, you know, John Carpenter, for heaven's sake. That was a great article. I mean, Halloween was one of the first pieces of piano music I could play. I think I always impress people with that at parties. So it was just a wonderful way of slowly digging into this language that I didn't understand, and about places I didn't understand, and artists that I didn't understand. And now it's become this quite lovely thing that turns up every month with a weirdo piece of vinyl on the front. I mean, I don't know what half this stuff is. I think one of them was just noise on one side and, like, you know, someone poking a duck on the other. It was brilliant. I mean, there was an interesting one recently, which was the Tom Tom Club edition.
Oh yeah, Gene's Club.
Yeah, because I love that track. I've loved that track ever since I think I first heard it on Grandmaster Flash.
Oh yeah, of course.
The Mega Mix. I think it's on the end of that somewhere. And I thought, well, that's fantastic. And then I discovered it through Talking Heads, and then Tom Tom Club on some video somewhere, going, my God, that's that piece of music that I like. And so it was fascinating to have that turn up, and then it was devastating for it not to be the original track on the vinyl. But it was really interesting because there was two sides that two people had a crack at doing a version of, and one of them was just fantastic, out of this world, and the other one was like, I could do better than that. But I won't tell you which is which. But it's kind of that thing where it's both encouraging and delightful in that, yeah, okay, you know, this is electronic music, this is what people do, and we're all in this, and we all have the ability to pull off stuff like this, you know. And that's interesting. I think that's really exciting.
Well, we try with the records that we, and the same with the covers, because the record, as I said, always ties into the cover.
Mm.
So we've got people who we would ordinarily put on the cover of the magazine who we can't get a single out of, for for probably very good reasons, like they're signed to Universal
Yeah.
or something, and they just whatever. So, but they don't get on the cover of the magazine as a result. But there you go. But we try and sort of flip between experimental stuff and pop stuff. So we will do. I mean, we've put out records by John Fox, Gary Newman, Japan,
Mm.
um, Underworld. I struggle to think. There's been a lot. Um, but then we'll also do kind of experimental weird things, like we did a Daphne Oram record
Yes.
that we
Yeah.
reissued, and it was like I forget what year it was, but it was 1959, 60 or something like that, that it had come out originally, and it was an EP, and it was like an educational record for children. So we kind of reissued that. So we make a point of never saying what's coming in the next
Mm.
issue. We always like to just kind of land this. So there's an element of trust in the readership that we're going to not upset them too much. We have this subscription thing where we don't do an annual subscription. Well, we don't push an annual subscription. We have a rolling monthly subscription. So you pay every month and you can cancel at any point you like, and then you can start again at any point you like. And I think that's perhaps helped, because it may well be that a record will infuriate one person because I've paid money for this. And they can stop their subscription, and then then the next month they miss out on the Japan record.
Mm.
Sorry, but they should have stuck with us. So but that's part of the fun, isn't it? That's part of the discovery of mixes like the Tom Tom Club. One
Yeah.
of which you love, and the other which you could happily never hear again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You did there was a Moog mini Moog demo disc as well. I think was one of the ones
we did that,
from a
yeah.
little
We did
while
the
ago.
50 years of the Mini Moog. We did, and we did a gold cover and spent a fortune on it. But yeah, that was the demo disc for Moog for when they launched the Mini Moog. So what, 1971 would that have been? I
Something
think.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, around then. So yeah, that's great. So it's kind of, it is the disc, and that was quite a sort of story getting it, because we said to Moog, can we, we'd like to do this. Have you got the ownership of the disc? And they just said, no idea. They hadn't got a clue. The guy who played the music had passed away several
Mm.
years ago, and we were cautious about it, because we don't, we've never, we won't put something out unless we have permission. We won't do that. Obviously, it's we're too big to get away with something like that, and we wouldn't want to get away with it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we really were unsure whether or not we should put this out, because we couldn't. Moog, we kind of figured, must own it, even though they weren't sure that they owned it, and their lawyers weren't sure that they owned it, and nobody could really tell. And it was kind of 50 years, and so we put it out in the expectation that we may have to pay somebody, a bit of money if somebody suddenly popped their head out and said, actually, I own that. But nobody has so far. But if they do, obviously we'll pay them. But you get into some tricky kind of places with things like that sometimes, dealing with
Mm.
the BBC. We did the Doctor Who original thing. We put that out as a 7-inch a
Yes.
few years ago when we did a Delia Derbyshire cover. And that was, that's much easier, because, the BBC know what they own, and, you do not put something out unless you've got their full permission, obviously. So it's an interesting sort of tightrope to walk down. But most of the artists, when we started putting out the records, we always went to the artist and say, oh, look, we really want to do this. Could we please maybe put something out, an alternative mix or something, please? And I know we kind of begged New Order very early on to let us put out something. And they said, yeah, yes, they would. So that we did a New Order cover, and we had a New Order 7-inch. And around that time, we were kind of mainly begging. And it's now got to the point where we kind of don't, because we know how to do it. We go through all the channels. We know a lot of the managers. We know a lot of the artists. We know a lot of the labels. We can generally get it through. and we pay the MCPS, and we pay the a fee or whatever is required. So it's all done kosher. We pay the publisher, so it's all fine. And we're a bit sort of more about, if somebody says no now, we just say, okay, fine, we won't do it then, and move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Because we don't have to kind of beg anymore, and people will more readily. We've got, I have to say, next month, the next issue, and is a corker, an absolute corker, and the one after that is pretty damn good as well. And the one we've just done, which is Suicide,
Yes.
I was delighted to get that one as well. That's done really well. That's been out a week now, and it's very close to selling out now.
Great stuff. So has the whole business changed then? When we're talking, because you're talking very much in old school music language when we talk about managers and publishing and copyright, those sorts of things. Do you still get that with new artists? Has it changed, or is the process or the engine, if you like, the mechanics? Is it all still the same?
I think it is, and actually, well, it might not be, but we would always do it that way. We would always go through the traditional routes. When it comes to getting kind of stuff into the magazine, it's less so, because we don't tend to rely on the PRs and the labels so much. I mean, back in the day, you were totally bound up in release dates and campaigns, and I think those sort of things are less important now. And I think that's a lot of that has to do with the internet. So I don't think that the fact if you're a month late on something matters anymore. I think because people are constantly discovering things, there is so much out there, and there is so much you can listen to and hear and access for nothing. I mean, Bandcamp is an amazing place. I just get lost in Bandcamp all the time, and all of these artists are putting their stuff out there, and you can listen to it. I actually much prefer. I don't use Spotify, actually. I don't like Spotify. I don't know why. It's not a moral thing or anything like that. I know there's a whole question about Spotify and what they pay artists and so on, and
it
YouTube
could be. People will be very impressed if you took a moral stance. Even if you don't have one, it will be so. Oh no, it's because of the war thing.
I just don't like it. I just prefer Bandcamp and me CDs and me vinyl. Really. And I'm lucky because I get enough stuff coming through the post and down the wire to me that I can just swim in music 24 hours a day, really, if I wanted to. So I'm very, very lucky. But even you don't have to be someone like me to be able to access loads of great music for Nixie. So Bandcamp is amazing because you've got all these fantastic artists, and we discover things every single day on Bandcamp. Maybe half a dozen things every day. So that's different because they don't have a label, they don't have a manager, probably they don't have a campaign, they don't even probably have anything other than I've done this, here it is, or pay what you like, give us a quid, whatever it is, and I'll always give them a quid, whatever they want for it, because I think you should actually. Someone like me certainly should. But I think that is different. That's a different way of dealing with it. But a lot of those artists, I fear for them as well, because I know that there's so much out there that most of them aren't going to get into electronic sound, and they're not going to get a lot of people downloading their stuff, and they might get a couple of quid here and there, but that's about as far as it will go for them. And I think actually maybe for a lot of them that's fine. But I suspect that for quite a lot of them, that's not fine, that they really would like to get their music out to a wider audience.
Yeah.
But it's hard because there's so much shouting out there. Everybody's going over here, come on, listen to me.
It always comes back to the same place. I mean, we've had a lot of talk recently about, there's always a new way. There's always yet another way to push your music or promote your music, or to go through a new format, a new way of releasing, that kind of thing. But it forever comes back to the same problem I had when I was a kid trying to become a rock star. Is who is ever going to hear it? How do you ever get it to anyone who's ever going to hear it? It doesn't matter what format it's in. Doesn't matter if it's on the blockchain or if it's on a CD or it's an MP3. It makes no difference if you can't get it to somebody to hear it. It's getting it out there is always the difficulty. And that's always seems to be the thing that you come back to. There's always needs to be someone who's doing that job of curating music for us, because we can't all be doing it. There's too much. As you say, you can lose yourself on Bandcamp, but you're never going to find all the bits that you want necessarily. And it's a difficult thing to navigate. I mean, once upon a time, Top of the Pops would tell us what it was we needed to buy.
Yeah.
And you'd marry that up, perhaps, or cross-reference it with the chart show on a Saturday morning, and you'd be right as rain. Or even MTV, dare I say. I mean, in the end of the 90s, I was watching MTV2 all the time. I'd have that on constantly in my house when that existed, when MTV had music on, back in those crazy days. But once you watch it for week in, week out, you realize that actually the playlist is pretty small, and you're being fed the same stuff all the time, and it becomes familiar. And then you realize in some ways you've been conned into believing this is all the music that there is. But that's the way that it works, because they are getting the airplay. I don't know how you get airplay. How does one get heard? That's the question that always seems to end up in some kind of record company, some kind of promoter, someone else who has to do that work for you. I don't think that's changed.
Yeah, it probably hasn't, in the sense of, in that, if you want to get airplay on Radio 1 or even, Six Music or something, then that is still the way that you have to do it. But, there are so many people out there doing internet radio shows.
Yes.
And I think that's where you need to kind of go. I think if you're an artist that's done a couple of albums on Bandcamp, and you don't know how to get more people to hear you, that's the place to go, because a lot of those guys are, it's work though. It takes work, but it's always taken work.
That's right.
To do
always,
it. You've got to put the hours in. So, troll around all the stations and find, there'll be specialist shows that are doing exactly what you've got, almost certainly. You just have, as I say, you just have to put the work in to do that. And a lot will fall by the wayside. But, there are so many little stations out there, community radio stations as well. And social media. That's the other place you can do it. I mean, that's really hard, because again, that I talk about shouting. That's even more shouting. That's kind of, and that's the ultimate in shouting, isn't it? Yeah. Really, look at me. Here's what I need to say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's levels to it, as there always is. I mean, because music equipment is so accessible these days, and because we perhaps have invested our free time in making tracks, and we can all self-release and all those sorts of things. There's a level where you don't really expect that this is going to make you any money. It's just enjoyable to this side play on the machine. I enjoy that process so much. It's so awesome to me that actually somebody buying it down the line is largely irrelevant. It would be lovely, because it would potentially finance me doing more of that thing that I really like. But it's not. It doesn't dictate whether I make the music in the first place.
And I think that it's very easy to get sort of hung up on the idea of fame and celebrity. I mean, fame and celebrity don't equal talent, particularly not at the minute. I mean, that probably sounds very like an old geezer talking, but. No, it doesn't. I mean, there are plenty of really talented people out there who are never going to be famous, and there are plenty of people out there who are never going to be talented. But maybe it's worse now than ever before. But it was always a little bit like that anyway. Yeah. So it's what do you want to do when you're making your music? Is it to be heard by tens of thousands of people? Well, then you need to make sure what you're doing is probably pretty bland pop music. And get yourself a manager and a record label and a campaign or two. Yeah. But if what you want to do is bugger about on some machines and make some great sound, then go for it. Because there will be somebody who wants to hear it.
Yeah, I mean the scene that sort of
Me.
impresses me the most is there's like this underground, you could call it, of electronic open mic nights that
Yeah,
happen
yeah,
in various towns around the country, and there's a little community of people who run these things that support each other because it's a hard job, I think, a thankless task. But there's one in Norwich that I've been to several times, not very recently. Well, obviously we've had the COVID thing, which has kind of
yeah,
knocked it
yeah.
on the head for a bit. But I am doing one next week, which I'm going to attempt to live stream for my sins, which will be fun.
Oh, cool.
But it happens in Norwich from time to time, and it's I mean it's amazing if you go along with an open heart, I think, and the ability to laugh at yourself. It's just the most fantastic evening. You can sit there going, well, this is a bit shite, because it kind of is, because I mean, there's a collection of people. All of us are a little bit weird, and the only people watching are probably us who's already there signed up to play. And we get our 10 minutes or our 15 minutes. And there's one guy who's got like a Game Boy that's been modded into a Casio keyboard that he hits with a hammer, for 10 minutes, and then twizzles some knobs. And somebody else who sings with some noise thing going on. And then there's some beautiful thing of bubblingness that somebody plays on something or other. And then you have a full-on synth pop band who are kind of doing Human League covers or something, which is amazing, complete with singers and everything. And you're going, wow. And it's just amazing. You have no clue what you're going to get. I mean, you'll get someone who's just playing, who's literally mixing on a laptop, doing a bit of Ableton Live and some loops and bits and pieces, and that's great too. It all mixes in there. So it's a fun space. Again, there's no illusions of we're going to get famous or rich doing this, but there's very much a camaraderie of this is such a lark, and it's such a joy and a terror to perform in front of people. There's something not quite, there's nothing quite like that. And
Yeah.
and I think if you are at home playing on your synthesizer and making a bit of noise, taking it out to performance will revolutionize what you do. It will change things, because it has to, because you are out of your comfort zone and in a crazy place, and it will make you grow. And I think that's a fantastic thing, and it exists, I think, purely because we know that we're not going to get anywhere with it, but sod it, let's perform, man, let's do it.
Absolutely. I mean, nobody, I don't think anybody ever at the beginning picked up a guitar or a synth or drumsticks or anything thinking, I want to be famous. Not really, not deep down inside. If they did, they probably should be certified. But they did it because they wanted to do it. They wanted to make some noise.
Yeah.
That was the thing, and I think that's what everyone needs to remember all the time. Really, the older you get, you shouldn't lose that. Just make some noise.
There's an element, yeah, of having to get over yourself, I think, because as one gets older, you do develop into that sort of grumbly old man way where everything's a bit crap, and everything, you could very easily tear anything down you like. And
Yeah,
but when you perform, you really sort of have to strip that away, because you need the support of these other people looking at you, and that out of your peripheral, they're just drinking their beers and they're talking amongst themselves, but damn it, I'm here, and I'm making some noise, and I'm going with that. And there's a sense of humblingness, that's not even a word, about it, that is great. I can't talk it up enough, really. There's places other than Norwich, I think, Perky Pat. I'll try to find the link to the national open mic night thing.
yeah. There's a group, isn't there? They go around. There's loads of cities that they do all the time.
Yeah.
I think as well, it's kind of worth remembering that we're really lucky in that we can access all this gear fairly easily and fairly cheaply. And if you'd have been born 50 years earlier, you'd have had to have sat down with a big bank of something, and you've had to have been, your dad would have had to have been a high-ranking banker in Dusseldorf or something to be able to afford to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that now. You can just, it's the equivalent of a triangle or a washboard. take your washboard with the wires in it out there and do something with it.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
No, absolutely. So talking about sort of new music then, because in let me pick up another different copy just for fun. go with that one. Because within the pages, although this probably isn't quite decent enough, towards the back, you
Yes.
have lots and lots and lots of reviews of new music. You know, pages upon pages of it. Some of it by real people. I mean, for instance, there's Simple Minds in this one, oddly, and OMD, and just over the next page there'll be people you've never heard of. Um, it's a fascinating collection of stuff. So you get a lot of stuff, I assume, sent
We
into
get a
you
lot.
to listen
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, we do. And also we rely on our freelance journalists, of whom there are about, I don't know, 40 or so, to feed into us as well, because, we've all got ears and we can all hear things. So we get sent stuff. We get told about stuff by our journalists. Predominantly, that's how things get through to the magazine. And then they have to be whittled down. As I said, Neil Mason's the man who's been doing that since issue 10 for us, and it's now issue 85. So, but everybody feeds into him as well. He's the commissioning editor. So he's the guy who has been responsible for the content largely. My job as editor is a little bit more. I mean, I don't actually have time to listen to as much music as he does. I spend a lot of my time dealing with investors, people like yourself, Robin, and the printers and the bank and the VAT and IOSS in Europe and distribution, W.H. Smiths, yada yada yada, managing freelancers, paying people. Yeah, so I wish I could say I sat down at 9 o'clock and started listening to music, but I kind of don't really. But Neil does, and indeed a lot of our writers do. So we get a lot of stuff, and they filter. They're the first sort of filter, really, of saying, yeah, I think this is really interesting. I really want to write about this. So we tend to get about 70 to 80 albums reviewed every month in the magazine, which is a small amount compared to what we get. But I think we do quite well. And there'll always be artists, we wouldn't ignore the new Depeche Mode album, for example. We would write a review about it. Of course we would. So there's always going to be a certain amount of those albums that just kind of have to go in, because you can't ignore them, and you don't want to ignore them anyway. But there is quite a lot of room for sort of other artists to come in there as well. So and we try and make it really broad in terms of what we think constitutes electronic music. And it's, it could be neoclassical stuff, it could be hauntology, it could be classic synth pop, it could be, we don't just stick to, we do sort of publish and albums, reviews of bands who use guitars even, but they're probably not playing riffs. They're doing something else with guitars. They're making interesting noises. That's the sound part of electronic sound. It's not. It doesn't mean you have to play a synth to get into the magazine. So we'll do some kind of post-rocky stuff, band like 65 Days of Static. No, is that what they're called? Completely. 65 Days of Static. I've gone a blank on what the sort of post-rock.
It sounds
band,
plausible, though. Definitely sounds plausible as a
yeah,
band name.
Yeah. They're quite a big band, so I hope I probably have misnamed them completely. But that's part of the problem as well, because we get so much music all the time that, you asked me what we had featured in the magazine last month, or even the one we put out last week, and I haven't got a clue, really. I can't tell you. I'm on the next one. In fact, I'm on the one after that now already. So,
but I mean, what
so
I find works for me is that I read through the smaller reviews, and I'm just either on my phone or on a laptop or something, and I'm just looking them up. And I've bought all sorts of albums through that, just because something sounds nice. I've no idea who they are. I don't care. It's not a question of being a fan of a band in particular. It's just seeing them there, hearing somebody talk about it in a way that makes it sound interesting, and then looking it up. Do I like it? Yes, I do. Well, I might have a bit of that. It might be on Bandcamp, and you can pick up all sorts of things that way. Sometimes simply digitally, or I like a bit of vinyl myself, so that that works out brilliantly. I think the ones that spring to mind that I discovered in that way were Hannah Peel, as I mentioned. Steve Davis, funnily enough, I saw in your pages before I realised that he was into music.
Right.
and I've done a lot of stuff with him now. It's really
Yeah, I know
interesting.
because you had him on the program, didn't
Yeah,
you?
yeah, we did.
And
WH,
he's great.
yeah,
I'm we went to a Buried Treasure Records, one of the labels we write about quite a bit, and they did an event in Wiltshire in some kind of military complex, a disused military complex, which was awesome. And we went down there for the night. Neil Mason and I went down there, and Steve Davis was DJing at it
yeah.
at about 5 in the morning. And um, I, growing up, I was a huge snooker fan. I
Yeah.
loved snooker. It shows me age probably. It was the era of Steve Davis. So Steve Davis I always thought was a fantastic kind of guy, and he was kind of there. And I met him at he was at the bar, and he's really tall. I'm not that tall, and I went up to him and sort of said who I was, and was then going to explain that it's an electronic music magazine and what we do. And it was astonishing because I was really quite moved because he put his pint down on the bar and he just threw his arms around me and said, "I fucking love your magazine."
Yeah,
It was
awesome.
brilliant.
He's
It
such
was
an
great.
enthusiast. I find it so inspirational. Funnily enough, it's funny what you get inspired by, but
Yeah.
it's
So
great.
we put him in, but
Yeah,
he's they're doing great stuff. Utopia Strong, brilliant, brilliant
yeah,
band.
no, they are absolutely. The other thing is, like in this month's one, for instance, you've got this fascinating interview with the Stylophone Orchestra, which
Oh yeah,
which sounds weird, but it's brilliant. I mean, to the point that I was looking everybody up, thinking, "Oh, I need to get one of these people on." The woman whose name I can't remember now, the doctor down at Kingston University, I think it is, or
Kingston
wherever it's.
University.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I must get her on the show, but I've kind of ran out of bandwidth for getting people on. But I might do that at another point. But that was a brilliant article about these bunch of idiots playing these stylophones. But then we had it on the flipping record, so it wasn't like you had to imagine it. You could then go and stick it on and listen to it, and it's like, good Lord, this is really good. No, it wasn't. No, was it on the seat? Was it on the? Where did I
that
hear
was
it
on
from?
CD. Yeah,
No, I
that
think
was.
it, or maybe you just posted a link
They
to the
are
playlist. Maybe that was it.
possibly. I
Yeah,
can't
no,
remember.
that was it.
They
That
weren't
was
on the
it.
vinyl.
Because they're
They
about
weren't
to
on the
release
vinyl.
it. Yeah, that's right. They're
Right.
about to release it on something, I think, and so you could go and
And
listen to it.
one of the fascinating things about it, because Tony Visconti
Yeah,
is involved.
I've like got his plugins, I think, somewhere. Yeah, these are real life people. It's funny, and the results are extraordinary.
Yeah, they are. They are. They really are. I mean, we're trying to find those kind of things. I mean, we did. I was growing up. As I said, I wrote to write about rock music as well. I'm a big Led Zeppelin fan,
Mm.
and we had John Paul Jones in the magazine early on for his ambient electronic project, which was just brilliant. And I probably would have never known that he was even doing such a thing if it wasn't for the magazine. So I discover things through it as well
Mm.
all the time.
The other
So
thing was I got. I think this was. I don't. Well, you can tell me what your involvement was. The big Clockwork Orange album.
oh yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
remember watching Clockwork Orange in my 20s and probably not seen it since. Do I remember the soundtrack only really vaguely as being that riff by, I don't know, someone to tell us what it is. Yeah, the classical music that's in there that they
Andy
beat people
Carlos,
up to.
Beethoven.
The Beethoven bit, that's right. But then
Yeah,
you did this strikingly orange. And I'm a fan of orange, generally speaking, as a colour. This fabulously orange double album, and it's amazing. It's just I can't tell you anything about it, so I can't remember, but I do remember listening to it, and it was kind of immediately familiar and yet strange and yet something else. I mean, was that so? How much of that was Electronic Sound Project, and how much was just something
it
you
was totally
came across?
totally our project. We did a Clockwork Orange issue. So although we
Mm,
are electronic music, we will kind of veer into those kind of cultural areas that are that have some resonance with we think with our readers. So we recently did a front cover on Drive, the film, and the soundtrack, because that's
right.
a great electronic soundtrack, but also the movie itself. Ryan Gosling is quite a very iconic movie. So we did a piece on that recently, but we did Clockwork Orange some time ago, about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. and so we did a piece about the soundtrack and just the kind of the cultural resonance of that film, dystopian, Kubrick. It had all the elements to it, really, and we talked a bit about some other Kubrick films probably as well in that piece. What we do, because they tend to be maybe 2 or 3 features put into an overall cover story, so it's not just an interview with a band. Sometimes it is, but generally it's other stuff as well. So, and for that issue, we didn't do a 7-inch single. We put out a CD where we got people to kind of cover and do versions of and remix kind of. No, they weren't remixed because we couldn't get the original. We weren't allowed to kind of remix it. Right. We had to do versions of the soundtrack and kind of improvisations on the soundtrack. And I think we had people like Scanner on there. I think Chris Carter was on there, and CD that came with the magazine, and it was a really, really fast-selling issue. That one was sold really quickly, and we got a lot of people said afterwards, "Oh, is it sold out? Yeah, can you press some more?" Well, no, because we don't really do that. It's kind of not worth doing it. By the time we've pressed them with vinyl at the minute, it'll be 5 years from now probably. But after a while, maybe even a couple of years later, perhaps 18 months, couple of years later, we thought, well, maybe we could take what we put out on CD, redo it again, and add some other stuff in, and release a double vinyl album. So that's what we did, and we got some sleeve notes and a piece from the who wrote Clockwork Orange? Who wrote the book? Oh, it's terrible getting old, isn't it? It really is.
I've only had a method of finding that sort of thing out.
Yeah. Oh, let me think. Who was it? Talk amongst yourselves.
Anthony Burgess.
Anthony Burgess. The Anthony Burgess Foundation in Manchester helped us with the sleeve notes as well. We have a little kind of 8-page, big 12-inch book thing that went with it as well, booklet. And that was a great project, and that was something that was, things like we did another album that we did was Jack Dangers, who writes a column for the magazine, that Jack from Manifesto, did a remixes of Terry Riley's In C. Fantastic piece of music that everybody kind of knows, and we did that as an album, as Yellow Vinyl, I think we did on that. We did a thing as well. We put out a David Bowie album, kind of. We gathered together all the. Do you remember the in the 1970s the compilation albums of hits of the day covered by a studio band?
Yeah,
they were called Top of the Pops albums.
That's right, and you're always disappointed that they weren't by the original people.
When you found out, when you got to being a little bit, a year on from being, very, very young, you realise that these weren't the originals. We put all the David Bowie tracks together from those albums and put out an album of David Bowie. Top of the Pops sings David Bowie album, which was a bit of a quirky thing to do, but that did all right. So we did these odd little things, really.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just getting a few streaming problems. Let me just see if there's anything that I can do to improve upon that. It's gone all right. Maybe someone's probably watching the telly in the house or something, but it's gone stop there. What I might do, if nobody minds, because no one appears to be watching on Facebook, I might just drop those out to see if that makes any difference at all. But then that's at the other end. Oh, you see, that has helped. Possibly.
Facebook. See, so much. It's always Facebook. There's so much trouble.
It could be. I'm getting little flashes. Stop streaming. No, I don't want to do that. See, the difficulty is to change, for instance, to change the quality of what's going out there in order to drop it. Oh, there you go. It's picked it back up again. would mean stopping the stream and restarting, and that's can end up being
Yeah.
a bit of a nightmare. So I think
Not good.
it's recovering. So
Okay.
we will press on in, and hopefully it's not too terrible for people out there. But hey, we're having an interesting conversation whether you can hear us or not. Haha. I'm afraid. But yes. Okay. All right. Yeah. No, I've got all the right lights on my end now. Is that still moving? That's moving
Cool.
again. Okay. Good. Right. We'll carry on as if nothing happened. So, so yeah. Cool. I was talking about the bigger vinyl projects. Yeah.
I think we would have done more of them in the last couple of years, but for the pandemic, that really sort of that made things quite difficult for us in lots of fronts. But I think particularly pressing vinyl at the moment is a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
No. Tell us a bit about that. What sort of challenges you've had in getting that
Well, the
ready?
lead times on it are just horrendous because the more as it goes on, when we first started pressing vinyl, which would have been 2016, it was quite different then. Now it's hard. We have to kind of work a long, long way in advance.
Yeah.
So, and it isn't always easy for us to do that. So, doing the kind of standalone album projects, we just sort of stopped doing it because we were looking at lead times of 6-9 months, and then even then they'd be problematic. Brexit was a bit of a problem for us, but then the COVID-19 situation meant that just getting stuff in, supply chain in general is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Everything at the moment is difficult. Paper prices are, we're getting, I'm getting a notification of paper price increases on an almost daily basis at the moment. So that's always fun.
Yeah, that's the
Always,
realities of hardware, isn't it? Having things in our hands.
it's just, yeah, exactly. So we're swallowing it at the moment. You know, we've had one price increase in the kind of 8-9 years that we've been doing the mag. So I suspect there'll be one coming at some point, but we're trying to hopefully not too soon. But yeah, getting vinyl is difficult.
Yeah, I say, do you think there's any possibility of a more ecologically friendly or easier to manufacture vinyl in the future? Because
I don't know.
I mean, the impression I get is that the vinyl plants that there are just so overwhelmed that they don't have time to think about retooling or improving the situation. So they just splash chemicals around, and people go home at the end of the day glowing of radioactivity and poisons and stuff. And it's not going to. There's going to need to be something dramatic to happen, and I think in order to change that. But I think there are possibilities, because it's not a very clean business, sadly, and it's something that we like. Why can't it be nice and we like it? Why does it
It's
have
not.
to be bad?
You're right. It's not clean and it's not fast either. You know, the number of copies that can be pressed in a day is quite small, and it's also not. The other problem with it is that getting them pressed in the UK is just so difficult. We press all of our stuff in either Poland or the Czech Republic, and even even there we are limited. We have a monthly slot booked, but at the moment we're limited on the number we can do. We can't press more than at the moment it's 2,500. So that means that our subscribers who subscribe to the bundle, we have to limit them, to under that number.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, especially when we've got something. When we get something, we think, we know we could do more than that, but we can't get the numbers up. I think that will change. In fact, we're already starting to see the lead time coming down a little bit at the moment in the last week or two. But we would really love to be able to do it in the UK, because that would cut down some mileage and be better.
Yeah, I mean, there's an opportunity there, I think, for someone to build a clean pressing plant. I mean, Gert has mentioned there. I mean, I was reading about somewhere that does this clean vinyl pressing, but of course it's a small operation and it needs to be scaled up. And it would be great to have something in the UK that could push something like that forward, because it would be brilliant.
I mean, the number of times I've sort of we've said, myself and Mark have said to each other, what we should have done is start a pressing plant, not a
Yeah,
magazine. That would have been a smart thing to have done
yeah,
8 years ago, but
yeah,
whatever. The problem is, though, that it's, the machinery is difficult to get hold of.
yeah,
Getting it tooled is very, very hard. Having people with the skills to do it, I think that's the real issue, and having the space as well. You've got to have a lot of you'll have a lot of steam,
mm,
for example. You've got to have a lot of space to be able to do these things, and,
mm.
you can't set up a pressing plant for a few £1,000s. It just doesn't. You need an awful lot of money.
I always remember that
Uh,
there's a video of De La Soul going to some couple's house in suburbia, back of Brixton somewhere, to get some of their records made. And it's this, middle-aged couple, in a tank top and horn-rimmed glasses that are doing the magic in their back bedroom, and that's where they got their records made in the early days, which is amazing, extraordinary. Some enthusiast who was putting it together.
that's
And
brilliant.
it somehow still feels like that. It feels like in this day and age, we
Well,
ought to be able to have a magnificent Chinese plant or Japanese plant that has these extraordinary machines and robots who are just slipping it all together.
exactly,
But it
exactly.
ain't
I mean,
happening.
when we had, I'm, because I'm, as I've mentioned, I'm not the least bit tech, so I don't play an instrument. I've never been. Well, I played the drums in school, but cue jokes about drummers not being musicians. Um, so but when we started having some vinyl problems a few years ago, I said to Mark Rowland, "Well, can't they just press the machine a bit quicker? What's the problem?" But then he explained to me how it works, and of course, it doesn't quite work like that. So um, I've just imagined them, just I don't know, somehow doing that, and then there'd be
Yeah.
loads of records coming.
Well, that's the impression you get, don't you? Think getting stamped out
Apparently, it's
like
not
that.
so.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
where
yeah.
where do we go from here then? What is the future for electronic sound? How are you feeling about the coming years as the pandemic opens up? Hopefully,
Well,
what's your focus?
so well, we're planning some changes this year. Certainly, there were some things that we wanted to do going back actually 3 or 4 years that we haven't been able to do. The pandemic really kind of put the kibosh on us. We did fine through it. Once we got our head around it, we had to dump a cover at the last minute,
Oh,
and come up with something completely out of the blue, which was a killer for a few weeks. But we did it, and we got through. We've got through it fine. So, but we're looking this year to make some changes. We'd like to make some changes to the magazine itself. Nothing too radical, just some sort of tweaks here and there. But the kind of big thing for us is sort of, we haven't really talked about this at all outside of the office. Is we're looking to do more online, basically.
right.
One of the interesting things with doing a print magazine is that, having started off as a digital magazine and being, in 2013, very futuristic. We were the future. We weren't a print magazine. We were an app. We were a magazine
Mm,
app. It was, we'd embraced the 21st century there. And then 2 years on, we went, let's not do that anymore. It's hell. So, and then we went to print. Now, actually, we're thinking of resurrecting some kind of online things. It won't be a magazine as such online. Um, but one thing we did find is that when we became a print magazine, we sold more digital issues, which was interesting.
how interesting.
So when we went into print, we stopped doing the app, and we just produced a PDF version of the magazine, and it sells pretty well.
Do you think it's the
Um,
same people buying the the two, if you know what I mean? As in they've got the thing and they like the thing, but they also would rather read it on their phone on the way to work.
it
Is that
could
the
be.
vibe?
I mean, yeah, it could be. I think there are perhaps some. I don't think there's many, but I think there are perhaps some. Because at the end of the day, that's the thing, is that a magazine isn't very convenient. It's you stick it on. It's by your bed, or it's on the table when it lands to your letterbox. You spend a couple of days looking through it and reading it. But it's not very convenient. If you wanted to go on a train journey, you might take it with you if you were going sort of a long journey. But if you're just popping down the road to work for a quarter of an hour, you don't want to be taking a magazine with you necessarily, you know. So what
No,
you
that's
want
true. I
is,
mean,
as you say,
yeah, I mean, I
you want
also
it on your phone.
subscribe to Sound on Sound magazine, and I get the physical mag, and I also subscribe to the digital version. I think it's
Right.
included, or there's at least there's a subscription that includes it,
Yeah.
because I know
Yeah.
that while I'll read it on the toilet, or I'll read it over lunch, when I actually need information that I know is in there, having that online is invaluable, and I can go and look up
Of course.
a review or something that I was interested in without having to try to dig out the magazine. So in that respect, that the two things work. I still like having the magazine, but I will probably read more of the. No, will I read more of the digital version? No, no, not necessarily. But the digital version is definitely useful. I mean, certainly, I think for
It is.
electronic sound, having a quick link to all these people's music would be awesome. Would be a fabulous resource
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
readers. Just
Yeah.
as that.
What we're looking at is rather than kind of replicating the magazine on.
Mm.
I mean, we kind of do replicate the magazine digitally anyway. That's what the PDF is, and it's cheaper than the print edition, and we do a lot of the people who do buy that or subscribe to that are not in the UK, so there's perhaps an issue
Yeah.
for them on postage and speed of getting it as well. So there's all kinds of reasons why someone in LA may prefer that to a print magazine that they get a month later and it costs them an arm and a leg in postage. So I think that's perhaps some of it, but we're sort of thinking more of a website actually than a kind of a bit of an archive type website where we'll perhaps put some old articles on and add to them. We've got some other plans as well. We're about to move offices, which is a really interesting. We've got an interesting space that we think we might be able to do some interesting things with. Um, so yeah, but I mean, it's sort of we're hopeful that by the summer we'll be doing some of this stuff. So that's the sort of plan for this year is to kind of tweak the magazine, do a bit more online stuff, which we think will promote the magazine as well. Because I think that's where we use the internet more than anything else. We don't use the internet to publish on particularly, but we use it to promote.
Yes. Yeah. Will you still be in Norwich if you're moving
Yes,
offices? Yes. Of course.
we,
Fantastic. Did you know it's in Norwich,
well,
everybody? Just down the
you've
road.
you've been to our you've been to our offices,
I
Robin,
have, yes.
a while ago, and we are moving to the next unit down in the same building.
Oh, right.
Um, but we're keeping the unit we've got already, so we're actually taking on a much. The space we're going to have is about, I would say, about 4 times bigger than what we've got at the moment. And it's 4 times bigger for a reason, but I don't really want to go into what we're going to do with the
Well,
space.
you
But
know, there's an
we think,
empty Toys R Us just across the road from you.
yeah, but we're not that big.
Oh, Toys R Us. That was.
One day, maybe. So, but I think it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff happening this year. Everybody's itching, aren't they, to get out and
Yeah.
do stuff and see people, and we just have to kind of hope that get through the next few weeks, hopefully, and things will open up and we can start to go out and see friends and go to gigs and do more of
Yeah.
that because that's what we
Absolutely.
need to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. No, too right. So, if somebody has a musical product, how would they? How's the best way to get it to be seen by your bank of people?
So, right. So, I'm always hesitating to say this. The best thing to do
Give us
is
your home
to, is
address.
to, is to yeah, come round. Um, the first thing to say is we would prefer digital stuff. So if you're going to send anything, while we love it's great to get vinyl and CDs and stuff and all that, and people really want you to have the vinyl in some cases, and I understand that, but it's kind of problematic because we've just got a new reviews editor who lives quite a long way away from Norwich,
Right.
so the chances of her popping down to pick up an album is nil, basically, because she lives in Edinburgh. So it's quite a long way from Norwich. So, but the best way to do it is just send an email into info@electronicsound.co.uk. Send some download link is always good, and we'll forward it on to whoever in the editorial department we think should hear it.
Great stuff. Great stuff.
We get a lot of stuff, but we're always looking out for more, because that's the other thing. There's always stuff that we've missed. There'll always be things that we've missed. It's kind of always the way. I remember doing the singles review for Melody Maker once, and making it was a Tribe Called Quest record, the first single, Description of a Fool, single of the week. And I came back home after delivering the copy. That was the old days. You used to put on a typewriter and take it into the office. Delivered the copy and came home and opened up a pile of records that I hadn't got to, because doing the singles was always a nightmare. You had to do them overnight, on the night before it was pressed. And you'd got 100 records to review, and you'd have to pick out 20 or 30 of them. And there was a pile that I hadn't got to, and because you look at the cover and go, no, not that one. You just had to do that. And there was one there that I think was still in the mailer. I hadn't even opened it. And I took it out and I put it on, and it was J. Saul Kane, Depth Charge, the first Depth Charge single. I absolutely adored Depth Charge records, those early records. And I listened to that and thought, this was single of the week. It shouldn't have been. So there you go. I missed that one. So we always miss stuff. So the more we get, the better, I guess.
Do you appreciate duplication? So, if you haven't replied to me, and it's not in the magazine, I'm going to write you in again and say, is that...
No, do it. Just do it, because
do it.
there's always people who, people and friends and associates and people I've known over the years who I'll get an email from out the booth saying, well, I did write in, but nobody picked up on it. And I said, well, how many times did you write in? Well, just once. You might be lucky the first time, but you really have to just keep. It's the same thing about putting the work in. Just keep at it.
So would that would be your advice to us musos out here, whatever age, still trying to chip away at it? It is about the graft?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Yeah,
I'm afraid it is, and it's not easy, and it takes time. But it's always been the same, and even that doesn't. I mean, I'm again going back to the kind of old Melody Maker days. I can't remember what band it was, probably just as well. They'd got single of the week in NME and Melody Maker the same week, and they played somewhere. I think they played the Water Rats in King's Cross, which is quite a small venue. But it's about 250 people maybe. And they got single of the week, both papers, and the following week they played the Water Rats. And I went to the gig because I quite liked the record, the band. I can't remember who it was. And talking to them afterwards, and there was like 5 people in the audience. And they said, we had single of the week in both papers, and there's 5 people here.
Mm.
And it's, you need single of the week in Melody Maker and NMEs like 3 or 4 times. Then you might get a few hundred people come to your gig. But until you've got to that point, chip paper by the time that gig came around. And
it's hard. I mean, it is. And also you see all the nostalgia. You see, I mean, we've got Madness coming to Thetford, I think, in the summer, which sounds like great. I mean, can they still stand up? I don't know. I mean, physically, are they still standing up on stage? But we love all that. But that in some ways that's disheartening to people who are trying to make music now, because it feels like you're never going to get in there because people are too busy listening to their youth or listening to stuff that's gone, or these lovely old bands are releasing themselves again because they can, because everyone wants to pick up again on vinyl, or everyone wants to see them again after all this time. And it's great for these people who are having another opportunity, later in life. But it does make you wonder, about that. Well, for a moment there, I almost popped the balloon and said that it's going to be impossible, because it's not. Because we all live and breathe this idea that it is possible to
Yeah.
to make music and put it out there, and we have to believe that, because I think that's there's something in that which drives us along to some degree. But it
It
is difficult.
it will always be so, though. I mean, I went through a period of listening to a lot of old stuff because I think that's what you do. I mean, I've always
Yeah,
thought that you will most people will go back to the music that resonated with them when they were 14, 16, 18, maybe, because those formative, your brain was still
yeah,
forming,
yeah,
and those records, those pieces of music went into your head in a different way at that point in time, and they meant so much more to you. We've all got this thing where, I mean, I've got records and pieces of music that I can play, and I am transported
yes.
immediately back to that time and place and those people that I was with. And what that means to me is so much more than something that came out last year. So I think it's understandable that people do that, and I think people will always do that. And
Mm,
while people have, and I think we're slightly different in ages. I'm a bit older than you, so my reference points are different to yours. But we'll
yes.
always, you'll still go back to that time, and I will go back to a time that is a bit earlier than your time. And there are people older than me who will go back to a time earlier than my time. But there are people younger than you who will go back to another time that you probably still think is quite new music because it was released in the
Yeah.
21st century. And it's not new music. It's their heritage. So we've always got a heritage to go back to,
Mm,
and there will be people who are in their late 20s probably, who are starting to now go back to the music of maybe only 10 years ago, 12 years ago, but it's their heritage, and it will have those same things. Those records, those pieces of music went into their heads in a different way, and it created this whole thing that they can return back to in an instant. Music transports you in a
mm.
way that nothing else can, I don't think.
No, I agree totally.
So, but that said, because it's constantly moving, and this is what we kind of thrive on at Electronic Sound. It's every month there is more stuff. The
Mm,
churn is constant, and that is fantastic. And long may that continue, because the 14, 16-year-old today needs their heritage as well.
mm.
So
I mean,
we have to give it to them, and we have to help them to find those things.
yeah. No, definitely. I mean, it's been fascinating watching my oldest son's musical taste develop, like over the last couple of years. I mean, he's 15 now, so he's at that prime, what I would have seen as my prime at 15 for music listening and discovery. And of course, when I was a kid, I never had any of the benefit of such a vast array of music. But I think that I've managed to, by playing enough stuff in the car, on long journeys, and exposing him to the right sort of things. It's really interesting when he sort of comes into the living room and puts his phone on some sort of playlist, and there's some classics in there. Hendrix came up. Was it American Pie came up today? I mean, where the heck did you get that from? But alongside that is new bands and other bits of indie stuff and bits and pieces, and even show tunes. And it's like, this is fantastic. I'm so happy that he's been able to embrace a broad church of music, and that's exciting. I never had that opportunity. I mean, my dad, bless him, was into the Spinners and James Last when I was a kid, and that was great. I don't mind that, but
Yeah,
it wasn't particularly broad.
yeah.
Whereas now they have such a rich, as you say, heritage to draw upon, and how well it sits amongst the new stuff as well. Reasonable new stuff. I'm sure there's some rubbishy new stuff too, but it all mixes in, and it's an exciting, very exciting time in music. I think I would love to
I
go
think
through it all again, rediscover it.
I mean, I suppose it's just the pot is just getting bigger and bigger all the time, and that makes it difficult in some ways as well in terms of how do you find things. But I do think actually that the within music there, I don't know if this is a good thing or not actually, but there isn't the sort of the single thing that, if you're into this thing, you are hip and cool, and if you're not, then you are not hip and cool. That doesn't seem to exist anymore. I don't think it has
Mm.
done for quite a while. And I remember when when punk happened, as I said, I was 14, 15. When Acid House happened, I was very lucky to be right in the middle of it, which was almost exactly 10 years on from punk was Acid House. And I remember thinking,
God, it's only 10 years. That
what?
seems crazy, doesn't it? Just
I,
10
I
years.
know. And yeah, exactly. It
Yeah.
seemed like forever, didn't it?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but
keep going.
but it was 11 years. So 11, 12 years. So when it got to the kind of like the late 90s, I remember thinking, okay, the cycle is coming round. What's it going to be? What's it going to be? It needs to be something that really, as somebody who was like in their late 30s, it needs to be something that is kind of, I don't like, that kind of knocks against me, distresses me. Oh, I can't listen to this stuff. It's
Yeah, can't
unlistenable.
hear the words. Too
And
noisy.
what was it? Because whatever it was, I don't know what it was.
No.
It Except, of course, actually, there was plenty of stuff that did that. And you think about the stuff that came out sort of late 90s into the 2000s, some of the grime stuff, some of the really heavy hip hop stuff that came out. This was stuff that actually, it wasn't upsetting to me. The hip hop stuff I kind of liked anyway, but I didn't really get grime, but I wasn't there to get it. These things don't affect you. A punk affected everybody because it got on the front cover of the Daily Mirror
Mm.
and the Sun. That's what, and it was the outrage thing. But I still think that actually there's a lot of music that would outrage older people if they knew what it was and could access it. And I think
Yeah.
it's great that actually, for the most part, we don't access it at our age. We shouldn't be accessing it. This should be an unknown world to us.
Yeah, no, definitely. There should be an unsophisticated area of music that doesn't resonate with us, that absolutely somehow speaks to the teenage experience. It gets a bit creepy hanging out of those things. I imagine kids need their
It's not
stuff.
it's not only I think it's not only generational, and it is, but it's also geographical as well.
Mm.
So wherever if you can go to different places. It was the same it was always the same. That was one of the things about Acid House that I found really interesting. That I worked at a magazine called The Buzz. Started there in '86. It only lasted a couple of years. It was it was a London-based magazine, and it was kind of bit of it was lots of music, bit of film, bit of art, bit of fashion. It's a bit like kind of ID, that kind of a magazine,
Right.
The
Yeah.
Face, that kind of a magazine, but a bit more street. Basically, it was independent. And when I was there, I met Mark Moore from S Express. And Mark used to write reviews for the magazine, and he was one of the people that was kind of hanging out there. And it was West London, so he was just down the road. He lived a couple of streets away from where the mag was, so he was hanging out there quite a lot. And he was DJing at the time in places like Heaven and the Mud and places like that. And London at the time was totally into hip hop, and it was hip hop and rare groove, so old funk records basically, and that's what everywhere you went you heard in sort of '86 and '87. Mark was really into house music, and he wanted to play house music as well. But every time he played house music in not so much Heaven, but certainly in some of the other clubs he was playing in, the people would just walk off the dance floor. They
Yeah.
didn't want to know. They wanted hip hop
Yeah.
and they wanted funk. And then when Acid House came along, it flipped in a matter of weeks. Suddenly, it was hip hop. Who wants that? It was house music that people wanted. Paul Oakenfold, one of the main drivers of Acid House as a DJ with Spectrum, his club at Heaven. He was a representative for Profile Records and Priority Records, the hip hop record labels, and he dumped all of that stuff and became a house DJ kind of almost overnight. So that whole thing flipped. And I remember this is, thinking, well, this is really interesting because it did literally change in a matter of weeks. I remember going to Paul Oakenfeld's club to Spectrum on a Monday night it was. He ran it on a Monday night because that was the only night Heaven would let him have, because he wanted to play house music, and they went, nobody wants house music. So he got the Monday night, and I remember going to it maybe week 2 or 3 or something like that. It was maybe a third full. And then by about 3 or 4 weeks later, you could not get into that place. The queues were down the road and up and into Trafalgar Square. It was impossible to get in. It turned that quickly. So I wrote about some of this stuff for Melody Maker and the kind of acid revolution. And one thing that I discovered really quickly was that London, who was still hung up in hip hop and funk, if you went to Manchester in 1986 or 87, or you went to Nottingham or Sheffield, they didn't want to know hip hop at all. It was house music already. Manchester was so far ahead of London in house music, and so was Nottingham and Sheffield and Leeds and these other places. And London, the supposedly cool capital, was actually completely out of touch with what was about to happen. And it wasn't until it hit London that it suddenly exploded, and you had the acid house kind of revolution, if you like. But the interesting thing that what I learned from that was that it's geographical. It wasn't only about, something could be happening 200 miles up the road and you had no idea about it. I think it's different now because of the internet, probably. But
I suppose so. But I mean, I was thinking, as my head's been churning on these things, is that perhaps now that we're getting this pandemic out of the way, hopefully, perhaps the answer lies in the live experience, where I talked a bit about the open mic. But I mean, the one in Norwich is very rough and ready, and we're doing the best we can on borrowed gear, that kind of thing. I went to one in Colchester back when we had that pandemic lull and things were okay for a bit. I can't remember when that was, a few months ago. And I went to one in Colchester, and they have a fantastic venue and a fantastic sound system. And I have no idea who played, although Steve Davis did do a little set. But all of them were fantastic. And a lot of that was to do with the quality of the sound system. And I mean, there was nothing that I can put a finger on particularly. We had some very different stuff from some people who were also names. I think we had, I'll just embarrass myself by not remembering who they were. But each, so they just brought a bunch of modular or a synth or two, and they made noise and they made stuff, and you just bathed in it and basked in it. It was fantastic. And it's that experience, I think, that's important in coming back to this idea of you need to be out there making, performing. We need to experience that, because that, I think, is the beauty with electronic music. Even though we think of it as being a studio based idea, it's when you take it out and you experience it with other people in a system that's too loud, is where I think you really appreciate what it has going for it. It has an unusual soul to it that you don't find in other bits and pieces, because it's not necessarily brash and in your face or angry. It's all sorts of different emotions, and very interpretive by the people who are listening to it. And I think that's where, if you're making electronic music, that's where you need to focus your energies, is towards an opportunity to perform, and also go listen. Get out there and attend these clubs and listen to the stuff, because you're not going to necessarily find them on the radio. They're not going to find them in the record store, but you'll find them in these little pubs and clubs.
No, and I think that's it. And also, you do it online as well, because you can, do a performance and stick it out there online. There's something I came across quite recently, is a guy called Daniel Biro, and he's been doing these monthly live. He's just surrounded by synths, and he will just play for an hour, and the whole thing's improvised. He'll do 40 minutes or so of completely improvised music. He'll just start playing, and then he plays. And he's done. I think he did. He's put out. I think again, if you look him up on Bandcamp, he's been around quite a few years, doing quite a lot of things, soundtrack stuff, and so on. And they are kind of real journeys. And he's done. I think he's done 4 or 5. And he's released each one as an album, and it's just totally live experience. Now, I've listened to a couple of them, and they kind of, some bits are better than others, of course. But that's part of the thing, isn't it? That's what he's doing. It's not like, here's this piece of perfection that I've crafted over the years, and I'm going to present it to you now. It's like, Right, roll your sleeves up. Here I go.
That's it.
And
That's it. Yeah.
yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. More of that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest realization I had, I think, when started to perform live with modular, was that the audience have no idea what it's supposed to sound like. They have no preconceived ideas. There's no album that they've been listening to that they're expecting it to sound like. You know, it could make any sound at all. So it doesn't actually matter really what I produce. You know, as long as I'm into it and I'm having fun, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how many mistakes I make, because to them, people listening, there are no mistakes, because it's all just whatever it is that you played. And in
Yeah,
some ways,
absolutely.
that's not to say that it's not a nerve-wracking, terrifying experience, or you're not disappointed if you don't do the thing you wanted to do. But you shouldn't have that as a barrier that people are going to think, oh, they didn't do that right, because it's just going to be sound and interaction, and you know, take it from there. Take it from there.
Exactly. Exactly. It was and also because people, as you say, people don't know what you're going to give them anyway. And a couple of years ago, I interviewed a guy called. Have you come across Doug McKechnie? Have you ever come across that name at all? He's a
No.
American San Francisco, a very early Moog adopter. He played the Moog from '68 was when he started, 1968. So um, his whole story is astonishing. And he, what was interesting for me about him, I kind of first heard about him because I was really into. I'm quite a Rolling Stones fan, and I was always fascinated by Altamont, the famous gig in 1969 at the end of '69 when the gig was it was a festival out in San Francisco, outside San Francisco, and there's a film, Give Me Shelter, the film based on it. It's a horror story because the Hells Angels kind of took over the security, and it was just everybody was tripping on really bad acid. 100, 200 or 300,000 people up there tripping off their heads. They didn't have any food and drink for a day. The Hells Angels were running riot. The bands were trying to play, getting nowhere. Jefferson Airplane guitar player got smacked in the face by a Hells Angel just on stage. It was chaos. It's a very famous gig. But the reason why Doug McKechnie had his Moog, and he hauled his Moog up out of San Francisco to Altamont. He'd been asked to help provide some speakers, I think, was what, because he was like an audio guy in San
Mm.
Francisco. So he hauled his Moog up there, and his little team of 3 or 4 guys. They got up there, and they played out up in the hill that overlooked Altamont in the middle of the night, and kind of freaked everybody out because nobody knew what the hell this thing was going to sound like. Of course not. So all these kind of like freaked out Stones fans and hippies are there, and they're hearing these noises from the hills in the darkness as they're coming up on LSD. So he played a bit there, and then he came down, he brought the Moog down, and they set it up on the stage, and he was due to play, I think, either before or after the Jefferson Airplane, and the Stones were on after that. And he set up, and he started off, and he said, "I'm going to start off with a low, very low tone, and just sort of build it up from there." So he started off, and he got about 5 seconds in, and the guy who was up on the mixing desk, way out in the crowd, who was a guy called Beer, who was Grateful Dead sound engineer. He just heard this sound, and everything on the desk went red. Everything went into red, and he just went, "Nope." And he just shut the whole thing down. So Doug McKechnie's actual performance at Altamont is about 5 seconds long.
Yeah.
Because and it's that thing about nobody knew what they expected to hear,
Mm.
and certainly the sound engineer wasn't expecting to hear that. So that was it. And then Doug was trapped on stage while the Stones came on and the Hells Angels were riding around on their motorbikes, and he couldn't get off the stage, just trying to protect his mood from
Yeah.
the marauding hairy gang, basically. So not knowing what you're gonna hear, that's a classic example of that. Just don't start off with a very low tone without telling the sound engineer what you're gonna
Yes. See, sound engineers, that's a luxury, I would say.
do.
You
Well,
don't
yeah,
find many
true.
of those sort of
No,
gigs that I do. But yeah, well, I guess we probably better bring this to a close because once again I'm hitting about 2 hours, and just feels that we've probably said enough. Although there's plenty we could continue to say.
Yeah, I need another cup of tea.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we should bring it to a sensible,
Brilliant.
sophisticated close. That's been great. Thanks so much for coming on and chatting to me about these sorts of things. I've no idea
Thank
what
you.
we covered or whether we were successful in doing so, but I certainly had a nice time. And
That's good.
yeah, and I hope you did out there in TV land did too. The chat's been weird this evening, I have to say. I've kept half an eye on it, and you're just a bunch of crazies, and you're lovely, but I don't know what that's all about.
Your usual crowd are going to be, what? Who's this guy? What's he talking about? What?
So yeah, who knows? Who knows? Anyway, so what I will do, I'll just update people on what's going on for the rest of the this live stream thing. So thanks, Push, for stopping by. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Hang on the line, and I'll say hello to you in a minute when I've stopped the stream, if that's okay. So nice one, and just moving to me. There we go. So yes, thanks for coming in. Thanks for dropping by and staying with the stream. Sorry we had a few wobbles there in the middle with the bandwidth. And if you're on Facebook, haha, you've gone home already. Sorry about that. But no one seems to mind. So coming up, where are we? What's today? Wednesday. Tomorrow is Thursday. Tomorrow is slightly different. Tomorrow I'm hosting Arthur Jolly from Rico Synth. He's a Brazilian synthesizer maker. He makes extraordinary synthesizers over there, and never had one in person or got to see one, but I think they're the most beautiful boutique little synths you could find anywhere. And I'm chatting to him on the Gear News channel, which is it's on Twitch. I will post the details throughout the day tomorrow. I don't know whether I can actually generate a link to it, but I will post when it happens and all those sorts of things, because Twitch is slightly different. But it'll only be on Twitch. It won't be on YouTube. And it will be on the Gear News channel, which is something called like Music Netzwerks in a very German way. But I will post the details out of that, and it should be an interesting conversation. It'll be about 8:30. Be myself and also Angus from Gear News. Hopefully, we'll be chatting to Arthur Jolly. So that's tomorrow. Then on Friday, we're building the Erica Synths DIY VCO together as a live stream build along. That'll be interesting. I'm hoping to do a whole series of those covering every module as they arrive every month. So that'll be the first one. We'll work out whether it's viable. After that, it might take too many hours, but we'll see. So we're going to learn about how to build a VCO and do it. Then next week, I've got Noir et Blanc V coming in on Monday to talk about leaving Eurorack, which will be interesting, controversial possibly. Then I have Philip from Modular Electronics coming to talk about synthesizers on the Tuesday. Then the rest of the week gets a bit fluid, but Thursday night is the open mic electronic music night in Norwich at Gringo's, of all places. So come and have a Mexican beer, and I'll try to live stream my 20-minute set from there. I don't know whether that's going to work. But anyway, it will be fun regardless. So that's the plan for the next couple of weeks. And I hope to see you at some more of those. So thanks ever so much for joining us. Thanks over at Twitch, Lan. Thanks at YouTube. Do take care and go and make some tunes. I will see you next time. Hit the button. Hit the button. There's a button.